All right, welcome, Patrice. I am super excited to have you on because I know your specialty is in federal grants or government grants. So what I would like to do is just dive right in because our viewers are smaller grassroots organizations, and
Mhm.
I've heard so many of them talk about all of the pain around it.
Mhm, mhm. Good, good. I'm hoping to help alleviate some of that pain.
Good,
Good.
good, good.
Mhm.
Well, what do you find most of the challenges are that nonprofits face with government grants?
Well, I would say the first challenging is with the perception of government grants. So obviously, unless they first address the perception, it's going to be harder for them to, make any real headway in actually applying. Because once you address that perception, then that opens up a lot of opportunities for you to actually be aware of and open to funding opportunities that are well aligned with the organization. So that's number one. Number two, I would say another challenge is some of the basic things that they're not aware of. What should I do first? Should I do this first or that first? Well, I'm here to tell you that the first thing you need to do, if you haven't already done this, is register in sam.gov. And that is the full registration, not just get the unique entity identifier, because you want to just make sure that you're registered, have that squared away, so that if you do find a funding opportunity that's due, let's say in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you're not also spending time trying to get into sam.gov, which can take 2 to 3 weeks. So that's the second thing. And then some of the other fundamentals I would say are really, really making sure that what they submit to the federal agency aligns with what the agency wants to fund. So I've been in instances where an organization specializes in, let's say, education, but they want to submit an application to an environmental policy, EPA grant, Environmental Protection Agency grant. And they're trying to force their education work and program design and all the things that are related to their specialty, the areas that they specialize in, rather than focusing on what EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, wants to fund. And so just really making sure that when you all read the solicitations, that it is definitely well aligned with your organization's existing work or work you plan on expanding into. And then thinking about, the organization is the one that's awarding the funds, and therefore you need to be, designing a program, developing a really strong program narrative that's aligned with what they want to fund, not necessarily what you want them to fund. So those are just some of the challenges, and I hope that helps shed some light there.
It has. I have seen many times organizations try to cram themselves into the guidelines when they're
Mhm.
not a natural fit.
Yeah.
So what types of grants then are typically available for nonprofits?
So there are a number of grants that are available for nonprofits. Almost every grant making agency, and according to grants.gov, the last time I checked, it said 39. There are actually probably more. So there are 39 grant making agencies. So I'm going to give you an example. So if you are an organization that works in workforce development, then obviously one of the first places you'd want to look is U.S. Department of Labor grants, especially many of the workforce grants. I'm hoping you guys aren't hearing that noise in the background. I'm having some work done on the house. And then, so that's one of the places they would definitely want to focus. Let's say they do work in the substance abuse area, youth mental health, then they would seek grants from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. That is a sub-agency of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So I'm just giving you an example of where they would find the grants, so that they can find grants that are well aligned with their organization. So the point I'm making is look for grants from an agency aligned with your work, and then look for grants where the eligibility requirements align with what you do. So if you're a nonprofit, make sure you're looking for grants from that agency where the eligible applicants are not, 501c3 charitable organizations. So So really there is a smorgasbord of federal grants out there, and organizations just need to find the ones that are well aligned with what they do.
So we have registered with sam.gov. We've gone through, we've looked at all the different grants. Now we found the perfect one and we're ready to apply. What are some of your top tips for that?
Wow. So I always joke, but I'm serious because I actually do this. And many people who manage, that apply to federal grants and, write grants know to do this, is that you first want to, of course, once you find the grant, like you find the grant that you want to apply for, read that solicitation 5-6 times. Now, maybe you read it 1 or 2 times before you actually start the application. But throughout the process, you're going to need to double check that solicitation. I do want to note that there have, the Office of Management and Budget, which is the agency that oversees a lot of things, but, federal grants also, they don't really oversee federal grants, but they sort of make the executive decisions for the federal government about federal grants and how they're administered, and they develop policies and guidance and all of that. But they've actually recently simplified the solicitation so that bottom line is you're going to start seeing some more streamlined looking solicitations. But definitely review that solicitation multiple times to make sure that you're not missing any important details. That's the first thing. Second thing, you'll also want to just make sure you're clear on exactly what is the application, instructions. What are the tools they require that you use? You make sure you grab everyone that's involved, that needs to be involved at the beginning, and have them work together and collaborate throughout the process. And just make sure you're clear about what you're trying to accomplish. I said all of those things. Those are all the steps to take. But really, what's most important before and after you take and initiate those steps is really think through what is it that you want the agency to fund, and then design. I always advise that our clients come to our very first meeting, if we're going to be providing grant writing services, with a 1-pager, even a 2-pager of what they're trying to accomplish. Just a broad overview so that when it's time for the writers to really start, get going on the writing, they have an idea of what they're trying to accomplish. There are other things that we do during the process, typically at the very beginning, to really tease out, really tease out and make sure that what our client wants to propose is aligned with what the solicitation is asking for. But those are some of the things to definitely consider when you approach a federal grant. Also, I want to make sure you all are aware that it sounds frustrating, but it really does take 6 to 8 weeks to actually work on a federal grant. So just make sure you guys are committed from the very beginning. It's not something you can do the weekend before the deadline. You will find yourself extremely stressed and overwhelmed with all of the details that you would need to do before. I mean, I wouldn't even do it 2 weeks before the deadline. So just want to make sure you guys are aware of that.
I know they can be very complicated. And then the management portion, once you've been awarded that grant, any tips on that process?
Wow. I would say the first tip, you realize a lot of my tips start with like, first fix the perception, first fix, your thoughts going in, and then it will all not necessarily come together, because this is what a lot of organizations ignore. They are so excited about applying for the funding and then getting the funding, and then they forget that once they get the funding, there is that's where I would say the quote unquote real work begins. So what some of the things that you'll definitely want to do are, number one, read the notice of award. For a lot of organizations, that that just seems like a lot to ask, but when you get your 40 to 50-page notice of award, identify who's going to read it, analyze it, and then make sure that you guys are clear on what the requirements are. That's number one. Number two, you'll definitely want to think through the systems you have in place within your organization and whether your systems need to be augmented to be able to manage that grant. And number three, if you don't have that, reach out to a consultant like GrantsWorks. The name of, we're at grantsworks.com, by the way, because what a consultant can do is identify where the gaps are in your systems, help you fix those gaps. And then by the time you're ready to hire a grant manager, assuming that's the approach that you take, that grant manager would be walking into, his or her job with the fundamentals in place. But definitely, highly suggest that you hire someone that who's going to be focused on that. Maybe you already have someone internally that has that experience or some of that experience. Make sure they get trained. Do not skimp on the training. Don't think this is something you can take for granted, because there are serious repercussions for misuse of federal funds, and people aren't aware that that there are serious repercussions. That could also include jail, because these are federal funds, right? And you want to make sure that you're using them correctly. Please don't be discouraged, because I just said that because there are many, many, many organizations around the country that have been able to benefit from just a huge amount of funding from a federal grant or state government grant or local government grant. But the important thing is to not take it for granted. Make sure you are proactive. Number 3, make sure that you have, obviously read the terms and conditions of the award. Go in with intention from the very beginning. Who's going to manage it? Who's going to be doing what? Here's the cadence of when we meet. Just really approach it like a project, and then understand that your systems will likely have to be augmented. And so just make sure you hire either a consultant who specializes in this, or hire someone who has the expertise to manage that. And again, just be ready for change. It's not necessarily, a bad change. It's great, because now you have augmented systems to be able to support other federal grants, other state government grants, other foundation grants, because some foundation grants, not many, also sometimes require that you have some of these stronger systems in place. And so now you have a system that's at a federal grant management threshold. Now everything else will be easier to manage.
Well, I know I've worked on a number of government grants here in Canada, and right down to how we have their logo. We have to have their logo anytime we do any kind of press, so that we have to go through communications. Like, there's so much to manage it.
Yeah.
Now, I also know a lot of small nonprofits that will go to Fiverr to try and find a grant writer, and then wonder why they're not getting results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't go to Fiverr to get a grant writer. If you were talking about other government grants, you want to get a grant writer that has federal grant writing experience, or a grant writer that has really, really strong grant writing experience. Maybe you guys can attempt your first federal grant together, but it cannot be someone who's wet behind the ear at grant writing, because you just definitely need to find someone who has that experience. It's just really, really important. I recommend that for whether it's foundation grants or federal grants, but definitely for federal grants. There are a lot of people out there calling themselves grant writers because maybe they successfully submitted a grant to, Home Depot for a $5,000 grant for some organization that they worked for. But you want to make sure that you find a grant writer that has experience writing federal grants, and can even give you some, writing samples, so that you can see what their writing is like. But yeah, that's extremely, extremely important. Writing a federal grant just requires some more in-depth experience, and so I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. Well, the stakes are a lot higher, but the funding's also a lot higher. I know I've been asked to do a workshop on using AI for grant writing, and that's that $5,000 one. And all you're doing is just, working up some of the language to be more emotive, and or taking some stats and producing some outcomes. And no, I agree. Now, resources, because you've mentioned systems. So what are some resources that nonprofits should have in place when looking at government grants?
Well, so the first thing that we're understanding that they're going to be representatives of nonprofits at different levels. So if I'm speaking, I'm going to start with some of the basics. So for those of you who already have a lot more experience, please forgive me from starting here. But what we're going to do is start with having an organizational budget. That's very important for a number of reasons outside of the application or the grant seeking, but definitely an organizational budget. I would also say definitely having a program specific budget, because when you apply for a grant, let's say you are designing a specific program, or for example, you already have a program, you're an emergency shelter, you have 3 programs. Let's say one program is a workforce development program or reskilling program for the women in the shelter. That should have its own budget. I'm speaking organizationally, right? Before you even think about the federal grant application, maybe you have another budget for a youth after school care program for the children of homeless parents. And maybe, so I just want you to all to start thinking about organizational budgets, program specific budgets. And so we'll start there. So that's one thing, because you need to be able to really think. First of all, you're going to have to submit a budget with the application, and a detailed budget at that. And so the better the budgetary systems you have in place, the better it will be for you all to craft a budget that makes sense for the organization and certainly makes sense for the application itself. You also want to make sure that, as I said, make sure you're registered in, the requisite portals. That's very important. That's both the application portal and, of course, sam.gov. You also want to, let me think, the templates that you need to have in place, make sure you're clear on what those are. And again, there are some other things, again, that we do that, that will help make sure that will help our clients prepare and have a strong proposal. So think through, maybe the theory of change. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the logic models. Really, take what you're proposing to be funded, use a logic model approach to think through what will be the ultimate outcomes. And I'll leave it there for now. I think it provides some insight. But I didn't know, did you have any other thoughts or questions as it's related to that? Because I just wanted to provide the foundations. Yeah.
No, I think my other question would be trends that you're seeing. I mean, I know a while back with COVID, there were so many grants
Yes.
available. So
Mhm.
what are you seeing now that's becoming available?
Wow. So, yes, with COVID, there are lots of grants from COVID. It's primarily, not just primarily, it's one of the many grants that were awarded. Many of you are aware of, because they were awarded across a broad swath of organizations that receive this funding. And that's, of course, the American Rescue Plan Act. All funds from the American Rescue Plan Act have to be obligated by the end of this year, December 31st, 2024. Obligated, not, but yeah, absolutely obligated by then. So that is, I'll say, going away to a certain extent. But then there was a ton of funding from the CHIPS Act. Again, that may not be relevant for most nonprofits listening, but that was just, billions of dollars that the federal government authorized to be awarded as grants and contracts to revamp the United States microchips industry. Not necessarily relevant, but a lot of funding from that. Then there is the bipartisan infrastructure law. A lot of people think, oh, well, that's just roads, bridges, trains, it has nothing to do with the work that I do. There was so much workforce development funding from that, because it's the bipartisan infrastructure law. So therefore, the U.S. needs a workforce that is trained in how to make sure some of these things are put in place. So, for example, it funded a number of environmental, climate change, environmental remediation, a ton of other funding that was centered around improving environmental management in the United States. And so there's a lot of funding for that, workforce development funding. For example, one I remember was the Energy Auditor Workforce Training Program. Millions of dollars that were awarded to organizations. So I'm giving an example of the types of funding that come from authorizations that may not seem like they're a good fit, but they actually are, because of again, that example where maybe workforce is something an organization focuses on. And then there's funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. And I always say that was a craftily funded and very craftily named, politically named law, but it actually was the United States' biggest attempt at addressing a lot of climate and, again, environmental issues in this country. And so billions, I would say, from the bipartisan infrastructure law, again, that was awarded as grants, contracts, and a number of different funding mechanisms. I believe that was about, don't quote me on the number, about $537 billion. Again, don't quote me on the numbers. For the Inflation Reduction Act, that was about 337 or 300 and something billion dollars. So just from those two laws alone, there was billions and billions of dollars in grants, contracts, loans, subsidies, prizes that have been and are being awarded. Well, so to answer your question, that's just really giving you some insight on the funding. But in terms of trends, some of the trends that I've seen are a lot of the solicitations do require that organizations really think through their governance structure. It's not necessarily you as the organization getting the funding and then deciding what's best for the community you're serving. Many of them do require that you bring the community to the table and that there's sort of like a co-developed governance structure or governance program, because the idea is that you're engaging the community. And so that's one of the things. So I saw quite a few community, I think they're called CDPs, community development plans, that were required to be submitted with the application. About a year or two ago, I used to see quite a few DEI plans that were required to be submitted with the application. I'm not seeing as many of them this year. But so I would say in terms of trends, it's really making sure that there is a co-development of a solution for a community, assuming it is a community-based project, rather than, we get the funding and we tell you, the community, what you need, and just take it and we know best. Now that's based on the grants that I've worked on with our clients, who are typically government agencies or large nonprofits that can implement large scale projects like that. Those are the ones I've recognized.
Yeah. I've actually worked with a number, well, again, in Canada, of smaller grassroots organizations that have come together to put in for a large government grant because they're all working together. Yeah, and our politics really influence the grants that are available.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, definitely know that. Again, I haven't seen any required DEI plans this year, or even late last year, but in 2022, I definitely saw a few of those.
Yeah.
And with everything that's happening around that topic now, I'm not surprised that those just aren't as available. Yeah.
Well, did we miss anything? Anything that any last minute tips that you have, or do you think we covered pretty much?
I would say last minute tips are, number one, please, again, don't take your federal or other government grants for granted. You cannot treat them the way you treat your foundation grants. Immediately assign someone to manage that grant. Or if you guys don't have the in-house capacity, hire a consultant to help you set up that capacity. Or maybe hire someone with experience. You hire someone on board as staff with that experience, so they can help you set it up. It will take a little bit longer because consultants have the expertise to come in and immediately identify what the challenges are and then help you address it. So those are definitely some considerations. Number 3 or 4, again, don't forget the training. Additional tips would be, read up as much as you can about the grants, what authorized the grants, join communities, or maybe find other federal grantees that have received that funding. What I don't recommend, though, is that you do exactly what they've done when it comes to compliance, because what they may be required to do for compliance may be different from what you need to do. I've seen instances where a client of mine said, well, we're going to move forward with this subaward template, or we're going to do this thing because we know of an organization that's been receiving that funding and it's worked for them. They haven't been caught, their hands haven't been slapped. So we're going to use that tool. Don't do that. Really think through what's best for your organization. And we have a lot of resources at grantsworksacademy.com. So you can definitely find our Federal Grant Simplified Bootcamp there. That's a 6-week bootcamp, 4 times a year. In addition to having access to all of the training in the bootcamp, I actually also host 6 consecutive weeks of 1-hour reviews of the training, question answer sessions to make sure that 4 times a year I make myself available to really deepen the experience for people who participate in the training. But yeah, absolutely, don't skimp on the training. Get your staff trained up. It's proactive, and you will not regret it. It's better to be prepared for a site visit or an audit rather than reacting to site visit findings or audit findings, because then you're wasting time on addressing something you could have done at your own pace proactively at the beginning of the process.
Mm. Well, thank you. I have always respected you as a grant writer, and the fact that you do offer that education is amazing. So I'm going to link your contact information below, like in the video description. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, and I appreciate this. I'm sure that our viewers do as well, because you just say federal government grant, and it just
It does, which makes my job a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that one of the things I want to do is to demystify federal grants, and so hopefully I'm able to do that, and I have been doing that, and so
yeah. Highly recommend your training. So again, I'm going to list all of that in the video description. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate it. And anytime anyone wants to reach out, they can certainly do that. But yeah, Joanne's been fantastic. She and I have had a couple of conversations, and I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thank you.